Let's all stand. Please be seated.
Thank you, Your Honour. Your Honours and Commissioner will recall that Mr Collins gave evidence last week and there was an additional statement, an unsigned statement that he wished to refer to, and he is available to do that today. So I call Mr Collins.
Collins, will you take an oath on the Bible or an affirmation?
Affirmation, please.
Would you repeat after me? I do solemnly, sincerely and truly
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly
declare and affirm
that
the evidence I shall give in this Royal Commission
the evidence I shall give in this Royal Commission
shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Thank you. Take a seat. Yes, Ms Finette.
Mr Collins, you've provided the Royal Commission with a note, and I invite you to read that.
Yes. Oh, sorry.
Allowed.
Okay. In addition to my evidence already put before the Commission, I wish to expand upon the meeting between Bishop Bird, myself and Peter Blenkiron in May of 2013 I referred to in my statement. I also wish to include details of a subsequent meeting with Father Adrian McInerney from the St Alepius Parish. In the course of the Victorian Parliamentary Inquiry, there were a number of assertions by church officials that funding for victims would be forthcoming. In light of these positive statements, Peter Blenkiron and I approached Bishop Bird via his office in early 2013. Subsequently, a meeting was organised which took place on the 13th of February 2013. At this meeting, attended by myself, Peter Blenkiron and Bishop Bird, we introduced ourselves and explained that Peter and I represented an informal group of approximately 60 survivors. We explained that there had been little done to meet the basic and immediate needs of survivors and that we had a number of ideas for practical forms of support that the church might offer at a local level. The Bishop was agreeable to a further meeting to allow us to develop our ideas. The meeting concluded amicably. After the meeting, I received an email from the Bishop saying, "Thank you for the opportunity to meet with you today. I hope our meeting will bear fruit in the time ahead." On the 30th of April, I wrote to the Bishop, "Paul, after seeing your appearance at the Parliamentary Inquiry and your statement with its mention of support for victims, Peter and I would like to meet with you and try to take this to a practical next step. Would you be free any time next Monday or Tuesday at whatever location you desire?" A meeting was organised for the 20th of May 2013. At this meeting, Peter and I initiated the conversation with the Bishop with a general discussion comparing the needs of military veterans with PTSD and abuse survivors. PTSD veterans received a pension that was in effect $252.60 per week, more than the DSP, which most abuse survivors were subsisting on. The veterans also had access to unlimited free psychological and medical services. We saw the comparison as useful in that the gross effect of PTSD was the same for individuals, regardless of cause. We put this comparison to the Bishop in terms of it being the basis for an interim plan pending a broader permanent scheme run by the government and funded by the Church. We put to the Bishop that there were a significant number of survivors that were in dire financial trouble and suffering, in the worst cases from malnutrition, homelessness, and at serious and immediate risk of suicide. We said that there were, we thought, about 40 people we knew to be at risk, but only some of them needed immediate financial support. In addition, we suggested that any help could be distributed through a third party, such as CASA or Moving Towards Justice. At this point, he became red in the face and his initial politeness disappeared. He said, "If we have to pay this sort of money to you people, then the diocese will declare bankruptcy." I replied, "Just like what happened in Boston?" He said, "Yes." The bishop then said, "We would just start up another diocese. You don't understand, the diocese has such a limited supply of funds." I became defensive and said, "Rubbish." At this point, Peter made reference to the $30 million profit that was recently announced by CCI, which is Catholic Church Insurances. Peter went on to say that he knew of the rental properties owned by the diocese and that these properties produced a lot of income. The bishop then yelled at us that the properties are not owned by the diocese, not even the cathedral is owned by us. The conversation became increasingly heated, and Peter quoted Cardinal Pell's statement to the inquiry that the church would pay what it was required to pay by the government and that funds were not a problem. The bishop replied that Pell is responsible for the Diocese of Sydney, not us here in Ballarat. Peter said firmly, "Look, we know you have control of the money from the properties." The bishop replied, "You don't know, we don't." I then said that the church had been portrayed in a negative light and this would only get worse with the up-and-coming Royal Commission, and that helping victims would be a way of showing leadership and would be a sign that you were turning things around. To our absolute astonishment, the bishop then said, "Andrew, you need to understand that the church has endured for thousands of years, and that in 30 to 40 years you people will all be dead and the church will endure for thousands of years more." The meeting concluded at that point and we left. I immediately phoned my friend and a fellow abuse survivor, Stephen Woods, to tell him what had happened, and subsequently told many people what Bishop Bird said to Peter and myself. In all subsequent meetings involving Peter or I with the diocese, Bishop Bird did not meet with us, instead sending his Vicar General in his place. A few weeks after this meeting, I was driving along Victoria Street, Ballarat East, when I passed St Alipius Church. I decided to stop and see if the parish priest, Father Adrian McInerney, was in. I was greeted by Sister Joan Dalgleish. Joan is the sister of my mother's sister's husband. Adrian was not in. Joan rang him and he asked if I could wait and he would return to the parish. Adrian returned and we went into a room at the front of the presbytery. I had known Adrian for many years as he had baptised all three of my children. I told Adrian that I had heard that when he was at the parish around 1970 that he had been told by a then student of St Alipius of abuses there and that he had threatened the child. He told him not to tell anyone. I asked him if this was true. Adrian became visibly upset. He said he was aware of the allegation and the person involved, but that it had not been him. He said that around that time there had been another priest at the parish with blonde hair and it may have been this priest. He said he could not recall this priest's name. Adrian then said that he needed to confess to a couple of other matters that had always troubled him. Adrian asked me if I had seen the picture of George Pell accompanying Risdale to the court. I said that I had. Adrian told me that it could have been him in that picture, as he had previously accompanied Risdale to court. He said that he was asked by Risdale to provide a reference in a minor matter, but that when they arrived at the court, he realised that the matter was about abusing children and that he was unwilling to help Risdale. Adrian told me that Risdale would sometimes call over to St Patrick's Cathedral when Adrian was there, and he would often ask to rest in a room and sometimes share a meal with him. He said that sometimes Risdale might have children with him, but that he never suspected anything odd. I note that on May the 19th, it was mentioned here by the Royal Commission Special Council that Adrian was on the Consultors Committee that helped to decide on the movement of Risdale. Adrian then said that he had gone through the seminary with another priest, Father X, who had been convicted of abusing children in Ballarat. Adrian said that they had both trained in Rome at the same time, and he recalled that Father X was always visiting a boys' home there. At the time, he thought that Father X just liked children, but thinking back, Adrian now thought that he should have realised that there could have been more. I took this to mean that Adrian suspected that Father X may have abused boys in Rome. I asked Adrian if he had reported any of this to police, and he replied that he had not. I then suggested that he should. Adrian said that he agreed and he would consider doing so. Adrian then said that he had been given some money by a parishioner to be used for a worthwhile purpose, and asked me how this could be used to help local victims of abuse. I said that I would get someone from Moving Towards Justice to contact him. This was done later and $1,000 was donated. After the meeting, I immediately rang Peter Blenkiron and Stephen Woods to relay what had been said.
Ms. Furness?
Your Honour.
Anything
I have no
further?
questions.
Does anyone else have any questions?
A question. In paragraph 7, you refer to a date of a meeting, May of 2015. Is that the correct date?
No, the date should have been May 2013.
Please.
Anyone else any questions?
No, Your Honour, I don't have any questions. As Your Honour may know, Father McInerney has provided a statement today responding to some of the things that Mr Collins has just said, and as I said last week in our letter, foreshadowed, Bishop Bird will also be doing that before he gives evidence.
Sorry, Bishop Bird will provide a statement before he gives evidence.
Yes, he has been asked to give a statement, which he has done in relation to various community impact topics, but since it has now emerged that he has been mentioned in the evidence of some of the survivor witnesses, such as Mr Collins, he will, now that he knows what it is, put on a short statement responding to those things.
Well, Mr Gray, I'm sure you remain conscious of what I said last week.
Certainly, Your Honour.
Very well. Seems there's no further questions for you. You are excused again. Thank you.
I call Adrian Francis McInerney.
Would you take an oath on the Bible or an affirmation?
A Bible.
Would you take the Bible in your hand, please, and repeat after me? I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give in this Royal Commission
that the evidence I shall give in this Royal Commission
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Yes, thank you. Take a seat, please.
Would you tell the Royal Commission your full name and occupation?
My full name is Adrian Francis McInerney. I'm a Catholic priest, parish priest of St Lepius Parish, Ballarat East.
And do you go by the name Father?
More commonly as Adrian, but sometimes Father.
You've made 2 statements. The first dated the 3rd of May 2015.
Yes.
Are the contents of that statement true and correct?
Yes.
I tender that statement.
It'll be Exhibit 2828.
You've made a further statement dated the 26th of May 2015. Are the contents of that statement true and correct? I tender that statement. In your second statement,
Just a second, Ms Finesse.
would your Honours and Commissioner wish to read the second
We
statement?
might just have a look at it if you just
Certainly.
pause for a moment.
Father, in your second statement, you refer at paragraphs 19 and 20 to the Consultants Committee. If you'd like to get that in front of you. Paragraphs 19 and 20 of your second statement. It's up on the screen if it helps.
Oh, okay.
In front of you, I think.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Now, you say there that you're a member of the Consultors Committee today.
Yes, I am.
What is the Consultors Committee?
It's a group of priests selected by the bishop to advise him on what he considers to be important matters.
Sorry, if you can just go a bit closer to the microphone.
Sorry.
Bring the microphone to you, it'll move. Just bring it across. No.
Better?
Yeah, that's right.
It's a group of priests invited by the bishop to form a consultative committee in which he consults on what serious matters and on the disposal of property and so forth.
What's the current membership of the Consultants Committee?
You're asking in terms of numbers?
No, positions. What positions are held by those who are on the current Consultants Committee?
I believe they're all parish priests.
Mm-hmm. There's no one of a different role than a parish priest on it?
Not that I can recall offhand at the moment.
Vicar Generals, are they usually on the...
Well, the Vicar General is also a parish priest.
Mm-hmm. Are there any parish priests that hold any other position in the diocese on the Consultants Committee?
I couldn't answer that. In terms of, do they hold positions other than parish priest?
Well, a Vicar General holds the position of Vicar General as well as being a parish priest. Isn't that right?
Yes.
Is there anyone else?
There'll be others who are chairs of committees. For instance, the ongoing spiritual formation of priests. One of the priests holds that position. I can't think of offhand of others.
Generally, you're appointed for a period of 5 years?
Yes.
And then after that, is it ordinarily the case that new people are appointed?
We have a new bishop and depend on him. But sometimes the people are appointed for a second term. Sometimes they retire at the end of the first term. A lot of that depends on the bishop at hand at the time.
How long have you been on the Consultants Committee?
12 months, I suppose. I'd say maybe 12 months.
So when did you begin on the Consultants Committee?
I wouldn't have a date. I couldn't give you a date. I just know that I've been to about 3 or 4 meetings. I don't know whether Bishop Paul was able to speak and tell you that. But, yeah, I'd say 1 to 2 years I've been on the committee.
Prior to Bishop Bird holding that position, were you on the Consultants Committee?
No.
You weren't a member of the Consultants Committee under any previous bishop?
Yes. Sorry. No, I'm not quite sure about that.
When you say you're not sure about that, you don't remember whether you have been on a Consultants Committee?
I think I was on the Consultants Committee towards the end of Bishop Mulkern's reign, I'm not sure.
Who was the bishop after Bishop Mulkern's?
Connors?
Were you on a consultative committee when Bishop Connors was the Bishop of Ballarat?
I don't think so.
In terms of your current work on the Consultants Committee, how frequently does it meet?
About quarterly, perhaps. And I'd have to say I've missed the last 2 meetings.
Do you regularly get papers before a meeting relevant to the agenda of the upcoming meeting?
Get some papers.
Father, I assume that being invited to the Consultants Committee is an important invitation in terms of the work of the diocese. Is that right?
Yes, Your Honour.
It brings you, as it were, to the centre of many decision-making processes. Is that right? So, when asked, you would treat it as an important role to fulfil. Is that right?
Absolutely.
And yet you say you can't remember whether you were a consultor under Bishop Mulcairns?
No, I can't say that. I really cannot.
It would be surprising if you can't remember, having regard to the fact that it's an important role to fulfil.
Yeah, I've a feeling that I was under Bishop Mulcairns, but not under Bishop Connors.
That's no better than a feeling, isn't it?
That's a feeling,
Yeah.
You've said that the role of the consultors is to advise the bishop on serious matters.
Yes.
Serious matters include any matters of finance.
Yes.
It includes matters such as the education and training of priests.
It would come under discussion there. That's usually under a different committee, I would suggest.
When you say it would come under discussion, I take it then that the matters that are set out on the agenda are matters that are discussed at the meeting.
I'm sorry, would you repeat that?
When you say it would come under discussion, I take it that the matters that are set out on the agenda are then matters that are discussed at the meeting.
Yes.
And they're discussed with a view to the bishop making a decision. Is that right?
Yes, many of the discussions are about the placement of priests, about whether a priest is appointed to a particular parish or elsewhere.
And that's a serious matter, given that it's a matter that's dealt with at the Consultants Committee.
Yes.
How does it come about that a decision is made as to where a priest is placed in the consultants' meeting?
Until recently, it went on a matter of seniority. If a priest, the most senior priest to apply for a parish, was granted that parish. In more recent times, and certainly in my experience of Bishop Bird, there's more discussions about the suitability of a particular person or the capability of a particular person to meet a particular need in a parish.
If there was more than one priest of the same seniority wanting a parish, that would be determined by reference to the suitability of the respective priests?
Yes, I think so.
Father, is it right to think that the value of having consultants in this process is because you can share with the bishop your knowledge of the priest and his capacities to fulfil a particular parish role?
That would be correct.
So we should understand the bishop is looking to the consultants to help the bishop know all that's to be known about the capacity of that priest.
That would be correct.
And I take it for that purpose the bishop engages in discussion with you to see what you know about that person.
Yes, that would be correct.
And it follows, doesn't it, that the bishop tells you all he knows about the person to enable you to give advice based on the information that's known?
Presumably.
Well, when you say presumably...
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, one would assume that the bishop is telling us what he knows.
You've been in meetings of consultors where bishops have indeed told you what they know about people under discussion for appointments.
Yes.
And that's routinely the case, isn't it, Father?
Yes.
Now, in terms of the appointment of priests, is it the case that the consultors committee have a role in receiving information about how the priest is performing at a parish?
Receiving information from?
From the bishop.
From the bishop. I think if there was something specific and something particularly untoward, yes. But just in terms of general performance, it wouldn't come under discussion.
So in the event that there was something about the performance of the priest that was, to use your word, untoward, you would expect a bishop to bring that to the attention of the consultants committee to discuss it?
Yes.
Because it would be relevant to their appointment, wouldn't it?
It would.
And it would be relevant to whether they should be moved to somewhere else.
Yes.
You held the position of secretary to the bishop from about 73 to 1979?
Yeah.
What was the role of secretary to the bishop?
I dealt with some minor matters of mail. More serious matters the bishop tended to deal with himself. To a large extent, I was his chauffeur, which allowed him to do, it's a large diocese, so a lot of time was spent travelling, so I would do the driving, the bishop would do work on reading various minutes or dictating letters and so forth that were to be sent out. I acted as his master of ceremonies throughout the diocese, except at the cathedral, so that his ceremonies flowed properly. That was pretty much the extent of it.
Did you open the mail and determine what matters should go to the bishop and what matters you could deal with?
Sometimes.
If you didn't, who did?
The bishop did.
The bishop opened the mail himself?
Yes.
As a matter of routine?
Pretty much, yeah.
But on occasions you did?
On occasions I did.
When parishioners wished to visit and speak with the bishop, did they make an appointment through you?
No, usually direct with the bishop.
Did you generally attend meetings with the bishop and parishioners?
No. No, I didn't.
Were there meetings that you commonly attended with the bishop where he spoke to others about matters relevant to the diocese?
In that period of time, I attended the consultors' meetings, but not as a member of the consultors, but as the minutes secretary.
Other than the
So
consultants?
just the recorder.
Other than the consultants committee?
For a time, there was a diocese pastoral council. I attended those sorts of meetings, and the bishop as well.
During your time as secretary, did any person come to you with a complaint about anything relevant to the diocese?
No.
Did you consider that that was part of your role as secretary to the bishop, to hear from parishioners with problems with a view to ultimately talking to the bishop about it?
No, I considered that more direct to the bishop.
There was a Vicar General at the time you were secretary?
Yes.
Who was that?
Frank Madden.
What was the role of the Vicar General at the time you were secretary?
Vicar General is someone who is the second in charge, I suppose, in the diocese, able to act in the bishop's name in his absence.
So he was more senior to you?
Oh, yes.
In the time that you were secretary, were you aware of the Vicar General receiving complaints from anyone about anything relevant to the diocese?
Don't recall any.
Did you see that that was part of his role?
Yes, it could be. Yeah.
You wouldn't be surprised if people came to him with their problems rather than go to the bishop.
I think at the time the Ballarat diocese was small enough for people to go direct to the bishop and to view the position as an opportunity to be direct to the bishop rather than through a Vicar General or a secretary or any other person.
By small enough, you mean in terms of population?
Yes, in terms of population and operation.
Because the size of it was indeed very large geographically.
Geographically it is, yes.
When you were secretary to the bishop, you attended the consultors' meetings?
Did.
And the purpose of the consultors' meetings then was the same as it is now?
Primarily to appoint people to positions and to pass judgment, if you like, on the disposal of property.
They were the two main.
They were the two main ones, yeah.
And as you said earlier, the consultors were advising the bishop on serious matters.
Yes.
That didn't change.
No.
When you were secretary to the bishop, you attended each consultors' meeting while you held that position?
I would have to say the majority of them anyway. I'm not certain that I was at every one.
Your role was to take the minutes?
Yes.
Did you participate in any discussion about whether a particular priest should be appointed to a particular parish?
No, that was strictly not my role.
So you didn't have a speaking part?
No, not at all.
Your job was to write the minutes?
Yes.
Who checked that the minutes were accurate after you had written them?
I believe that they were read at the next meeting.
Did they go to the bishop first and then to the next meeting?
The bishop signed off on them anyway.
And the process of the meeting was for the bishop to indicate that there was a vacancy in a parish?
Yes.
And for there to be a discussion about who might be suitable to fill that vacancy?
And who had applied for that position?
There can be applications, but there can also be the case, can't there, where there can be no applications and you have to decide who should be appointed?
That would happen, yes, if there were no applications.
And the bishop would tell you his thoughts about the applicants?
Yes.
And what he knew? That's right.
But yes, by and large, the bishop in the end would adopt the practice of coming in with a list of suggestions because it was the best way of getting a discussion started. Without that, people tended not to say anything.
And then when he came in with his list of suggestions, those of the consultants present would give their views and their information about the respective applicants. And in the event there was no applicant, a decision had to be made as to who should be appointed?
Yes.
How was that decision made?
I don't know, to be honest. I suppose, and this is a supposition, discussion and sort of say, well, ring Father McInerney and see if he'll take it.
I take it the expectation of consultants was that there would be a full and frank discussion.
That would be the expectation, yes.
I mean, given the nature of the meeting, the expectation of everyone was that everything they knew, good or bad, would be laid on the table.
Yes.
Was there a discussion about why a parish had become vacant?
No, it was usually obvious from the point of view of a priest had died or retired or asked to be shifted.
So in the event that they died or retired, it was obvious that it was vacant?
Yes.
And if a priest had asked to be shifted, the reasons for the priest asking to be shifted would be a matter of discussion?
Yes.
Were there cases where the time that a priest had held a position without necessarily being asked to be shifted was a matter for discussion in the consultants' meetings?
I think at that time, once a priest was appointed as parish priest in a particular parish, he had right of tenure. And so he could stay there as long as he wished.
Was there a time period that assistant priests normally stayed in a parish as an assistant priest?
No set time.
So there's no period of 2 years when there was an expectation that an assistant priest would go somewhere else?
No, it wasn't a set time like that.
In the event that a priest was on leave or became sick, was the practice to appoint a priest on a temporary basis to fill that person's position?
Yes, at time to time, yes.
And they were decisions that were made at the consultants' committee meeting?
Normally.
Could the bishop make a decision about the appointment of a parish without first seeking the advice of the consultors?
I believe he could.
So canon law didn't preclude that occurring?
I don't know enough canon law
Nor do I,
to be able to
Father.
answer that.
In your period as secretary or as a consultor, was there the case that the bishop made decisions about priests without regard to the consultors' committee?
I can't remember any specific case.
And if that happened, it would be most unusual.
Yes.
How many, when you were the secretary, how many parishes were there in the diocese?
I think there were 50 something, but that's just...
50 odd.
Yeah.
And how many priests or assistant priests?
At one stage, the priests got up to, I think, 100 priests in the diocese.
100.
Yeah, it was around 99 or 100.
And when you were secretary, did you know all those priests?
Yes.
And I take it that others in senior positions in the diocese would know them all as well.
Oh, yes.
You'd meet together from time to time?
We'd meet together on retreats, meet together on study days.
So there were opportunities for the consultants to form a view about individual priests by reason of the interactions from time to time.
Yes.
Were there regular set meetings of all the priests with the bishop to talk about how the work in the diocese was proceeding?
There was the Council of Priests met where, at that stage, the Council of Priests, the diocese was divided into zones with the original names, North, South and Central. And those zones would meet and discuss various issues. Some of those issues would be directed towards the council itself, which was made up of representatives from those three zones in the presence of the bishop.
When you say in those days, you're talking about the 70s when you were secretary?
Yes.
How does it work today?
Well, today, because we have far fewer priests, the Council of Priests meets as a whole assembly.
Can I show you a copy of minutes of a meeting of consultors held in June 1993 when Bishop Mulcairns was present?
Yes. 1993.
Yes.
Yes.
There's June 1993. Now, they were the days when minutes were clearly handwritten,
Yes.
Father, and you can see there that present is Bishop Mulcairns,
Yes.
Father Finnegan as Vicar General,
Yes.
Father Colley.
Yes.
Father Colley was a priest where at that time?
I don't know.
You know him to be a priest.
I know that he was a priest. He's no longer
Father Bowen,
deceased. Yeah.
Father Arundel.
Yes.
Do you remember where Father Arundel was?
Possibly Portland, but I really can't remember.
Was he a contemporary of yours?
No, he's a bit older than I am.
Father McKinnon.
Jane McKinnon, yes.
What do you remember about him?
I can't remember where he was appointed. I remember at one stage he was parish priest at Beaufort. He's currently at Hamilton.
And then you, A. McInerney?
Yes.
And P. Sherman.
Yes.
So this helps you recall that indeed you were on the Consultors Committee under Bishop Mulcairns in 1993.
Yes, it does.
And these were routinely the minutes that you received after a meeting to approve.
I think we received them when they were read at the next meeting.
Yes. So you'll see under minutes, the minutes of the meeting held on the 6th of May were read and accepted. Do you see that? That's in the first paragraph after absent.
Oh, okay, yes.
So that suggests that they met monthly in those days. Is
Yes.
that your recollection?
No.
You thought less frequently?
Yes.
As the need arose?
As the need arose.
Just turn to the second page. The second underlined heading, Father P.D. Ryan.
Yes.
And it says there that has had all his faculties revoked with the exception of being able to celebrate Mass privately without giving any appearance of having a ecclesiastical appointment or office. The bishop explained to the consultors the reasons for this course of action. Now, do you know who Father Ryan was in 93?
I do.
Do you now recall being advised that his faculties were revoked?
I don't recall that meeting, but I do recall that he had his faculties revoked. Yeah.
Thank you. It's something that stayed in your mind?
Not particularly with him.
Well, then you said you recalled that his faculties were revoked.
Oh, yes. I was trying to say I didn't recall from that meeting
understand that. My question...
But I do remember Paul David Ryan. I do know that his faculties were revoked. Yeah.
Why were his faculties revoked?
I believe it was because of a sexual abuse issue.
A sexual abuse issue? Excuse me? A sexual abuse issue?
Yes, if you ask me specifics, I couldn't give them to you, but I know that he was charged with sexual offences.
In relation to children?
I would have thought pre-teens rather than little children. I know there's...
I'm sorry, pre-teens? So less than 13?
No, I thought it was older than 13, but I'm not sure of the specifics.
Under 18 are children?
Oh, certainly under 18, yes.
When do you recall first hearing that Father Ryan was the subject of charge or complaint about child sexual abuse allegations?
I don't recall that.
Prior to his faculties being revoked?
I can't be specific about that. Can't recall it.
The fact of a father within a parish or within a diocese where the numbers of priests in the diocese was small being the subject of charges of child sexual abuse would certainly be something that would stay with you, Father.
I remember that he was charged with that, but I don't remember specifically when I first heard it.
It was before the faculties were revoked or after?
I don't recall that specifically either.
Mm-hmm. Would you expect faculties to be revoked if a father had indeed been charged with child sexual assault offences?
I would expect so.
Other than Father Ryan, when you have been on the Consultants Committee, has it happened that the faculties have been revoked?
I don't recall any other issues, like when I was on the committee.
I beg your pardon?
I don't recall any other times when I was on the consultants.
And you were on the committee when Bishop Malkerns was bishop?
Yes.
And the minutes I've shown you is June 1993.
Yes.
Can you help us over what period of time you were on that committee?
No, I could only hazard a guess.
Something like late 80s?
It's possible.
Other than Father Ryan, did it come to discussion at the Consultants Committee that a priest within the diocese had been charged with child sexual abuse offences?
I don't recall anything like that at a consultants meeting at which I was present.
So when you say you don't recall, if it had happened, it would be something that you would recall, wouldn't it?
I would imagine so.
So is it the case that you don't believe that it happened, that at any Consultants Committee meeting, a priest being charged with child sexual abuse offences was brought to the attention of the meeting by the bishop?
Other than Paul David Ryan. I can't recall any time when I was at the consultants meeting when that happened.
What about more recently, in the last year or so? You've been on the Consultants Committee.
No, that hasn't been an issue.
Okay. Now, just coming to your first statement.
Yes.
Do you have that?
Yes, I do.
I might tender those minutes, Your Honour. They're the minutes of the 6th of June, 1993 of the Consultants.
We don't have them otherwise in the documents.
No.
Very well. Can we have them? The minutes of the consultants of the 6th of May 1993 will be Exhibit 28 to 30.
Thank you, Your Honour. And now, Father, you attended secondary school at St Joseph's College in Mildura.
I did.
That was a diocesan school or order?
Sisters of Mercy.
And then you attended St Patrick's College in Ballarat. And you say to study Latin. Did you need to study Latin in order to enter the seminary?
Well, that was the regulation at the time, but the year that I actually arrived, they abolished it.
And while you were in Mildura, Monsignor John Day was the parish priest at Mildura for at least some of that. Did you know him?
I did.
Were you friendly with him?
I was his altar server.
You were his...
Altar server,
I see.
among others. And my family had a lot to do with him.
During the time you knew him, did any complaints or rumours come to your attention about his conduct?
None at all while I was in Mildura.
Other than in Mildura?
No. At a later date? Yes, at a later date.
When was that?
I believe it must have... it was after I had left Mildura anyway, so whether it was while I was in the seminary or early days of priesthood, I'm not sure.
You're in the seminary from 62 to 65?
At Werribee, yes. And then 65 to 69 in Rome.
During that time, the 60s, did it come to your attention any complaints or rumours against Monsignor Day?
I can't be specific about that in recollection.
At any time? Did complaints or rumours come to your attention?
Yes.
About him? When?
That's why I say I can't be specific as to when.
Is it likely to be the 60s while you're at the seminary or in Rome?
Not when I was in Rome. I'd suggest it was later than that.
Then you were ordained as a Catholic priest in the Diocese of Ballarat, August 69?
Yes, I was ordained in the parish of Mildura.
And then you were at St Alepius between 69 and 72?
Yes.
So was it in that period of time or later?
I think it was later, but I can't be certain about that.
You can't recall now what you were doing at the time?
No.
Well, you were in the diocesan office being secretary between 73 to 78, was it then?
In recollection, I'm just reflecting that Bishop Monsignor Mackenzie was appointed. No, look, I can't quite be specific as to when that was.
But it did come to your attention?
Yes, it did.
Complaints or rumours?
It was complaints, I suppose. Yeah.
Of what?
Sexual offences against, particularly against some boys, I think.
Was that the first time that complaints of sexual offences against children of someone within the diocese came to your attention?
I believe it was. Yeah.
So that was the first time?
I think so. Yeah.
And you can't remember when it was?
No.
Can you remember the decade?
No, I can't be specific.
It'd be quite momentous, wouldn't it, Father, to hear
Well,
that?
it was in the sense that it was a big disruption in the parish of Mildura, and it was a disruption sort of in my family, but exactly when that happened, I don't know.
By disruption, do you mean that people were upset that children had been abused by Monsignor Day?
Well, some people believed it and some people denied it.
So was it a disruption in the sense that it was, for Monsignor Day, a dreadful period?
Could you repeat that, please?
Was it a disruption in the sense that it was, for Monsignor Day, a dreadful period?
Yes. I'm thinking in terms of the decade in which it happened. If I refer to circumstances in my family's life, it was after my father had died, so it would be... Oh, no, it wasn't. I'm sorry. I'm distracted there.
So your parents were alive at the time?
Yes. Yeah.
And your father died when?
My father died in 1979.
So it was prior to 79?
Yes.
Was it when you were working with Bishop Malkerns as his secretary between 73 and 78?
Could well have been. Yeah.
Did it come as a shock to you, the allegation?
Yes, it did. Completely. Yes.
And what was your reaction to it?
Well, my first reaction was just to suggest that the boys were lying. That was my first reaction. Because I had so much association with him and there was no indication of any sexual abuse or attempted with myself or my brothers. But, it didn't take too long to learn that it wasn't a lie at all. It was a reality.
How did you come to learn that it wasn't a lie?
Oh, just by listening to the people and what was being said.
Did you discuss the allegation with the bishop?
Probably, but I can't be sure, Your Honour.
Just to go back to
I would have discussed it with him, I'm sure, if I was still his secretary. If I was not his secretary at the time, I probably wouldn't have discussed it.
Well, I assume the relationship of bishop and secretary is a close one in a professional sense.
Close enough, yes. Yeah.
And you would talk about allegations that might shock you, I assume, quite readily.
I talked about Monsignor Day because I knew him and knew the people involved. But he didn't always discuss important things with me. He told me what he thought I needed to know.
But if you heard allegations or heard of allegations against a priest, you'd tell the bishop, wouldn't you?
I would tell the bishop, yes.
And I take it that amongst priests there was commonly discussion about other priests.
Other priests offending?
Well, just other priests and what they might do, whether they were good, bad, or what they'd heard about them.
Oh, to some extent, yes.
I mean, I take it that priests are like pretty much any other human community. They'll gossip, is that right?
They would, yes.
They'll gossip about the good things and the bad things.
Yes.
Other than Bishop Mulcairns, did you talk to anyone else working in the diocese, including the Vicar General, about the complaints about Monsignor Day?
If I talked to anyone, it would have been with the Vicar General, but I can't remember those conversations.
And that was Frank Madden at the time.
Madden at the time, yeah.
It'd be surprising if you didn't talk to someone having heard such momentous complaints about someone you knew.
Oh, so?
You say that initially you didn't believe it, and then having listened, you did believe it.
Yes.
Was that something that occurred in a relatively short period of time?
I think so, yes. When it became more and more a matter for the press and so forth, and you heard statements from the boys themselves, reported statements, referred statements.
If it was in the media, that certainly would have been a matter that would have been discussed with those in the bishop's office, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Now, you went to Corpus Christi Seminary in the 60s.
Yes.
Who else was at Corpus Christi Seminary when you were there that you became friendly with?
I became friendly with? Matt McDonald, Ian Stewart, Kevin Larkins. How many would you?
I beg your pardon?
How many do you?
Well, I'm happy for you to tell me however many people you want to about who you became friendly with at the seminary.
Okay. Well, it might have been a dozen, I suppose.
How many men were at the seminary?
Well, there was 20 or so in my year, so there might have been 60, 70.
But there were 3 or so years?
There were 4 years of that seminary, yeah.
When you entered the seminary, how old were you?
About 18.
Were the other men in the seminary about your age?
Most of them were. The 1 or 2 were older, but had other careers.
Anyone younger?
A couple younger, but only by a year or so.
So no one younger than 16?
Oh, no. They would have finished what was then called the matriculation there might have been one or two who had special dispensation to come in without matriculation, but only 1 year less study, and that would have been because they were older.
So the youngest was probably around 17.
Yes.
What did they tell you about matters that we now call sex education when you're at the seminary?
Well, in those days, it told me nothing. It was just, I left school, went to the seminary.
Were you spoken to about the vow of celibacy and how you were to maintain that?
Yes.
What were you told?
Very little. And I don't want to be flippant about that, but we're told very little.
What were your own thoughts in the seminary about the vow of celibacy and how that would affect you and how you would come to terms with it?
It didn't affect me then. It was much later that I felt the full impact of what taking a vow of celibacy meant.
What did you understand by the vow of celibacy? What did it mean?
Well, it just meant abstinence from sexual behaviour and not to marry.
So, are they two separate things? Not to marry and no sexual behaviour?
They're related, but they're two separate things. Yes.
So,
yes,
I want to clear what
celibacy is not just about not marrying; it's about a way of life as well.
it's about.
A way of life.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I'm fully aware that not everyone remains with one partner, and so that celibacy means not having casual sexual relationships or sexual relationships other than marriage.
What does chastity mean to you?
Chastity would be trying to live a life that supported the vow of celibacy, and that's for me. But in general, chastity is an attitude and way of looking at and understanding one's sexuality and the sexuality of others.
What are you taught by the Church as to the content of an obligation of chastity? What does it mean to a priest?
I'm sorry, Your Honour, would you just repeat that?
Yes, what does the Church teach you? So that what does a priest understand by the obligation of chastity?
That he lives in such a way as to sustain a life of celibacy.
That doesn't help me a great deal. Are you saying that chastity is the same as celibacy?
No, I think chastity is broader than celibacy, that it's a way of looking at and appreciating one's sexuality.
Well, what's the way of looking at it and appreciating that's involved in chastity?
Appreciating one's sexuality as being a gift from God in creation, that it is who one is.
How does chastity relate to celibacy then?
It's an aid to it.
In what way is it an aid to it?
Celibacy, as I would see it, celibacy relates to not taking a permanent partner, whereas chastity is a way of living that sustains that and leads to that decision.
If one isn't faithful to an obligation of chastity, have you committed a sin in the doctrine of the Church?
Yes.
What sorts of things would breach the obligation of chastity?
Specifically, as in...
what sort of acts? Give us some idea. What sort of acts would be a breach of an obligation of chastity?
Sexual embracing, like sexual intercourse, certainly, and kissing, touching, those sorts of things that are specifically sexually related. There's obviously degrees of an affectionate kiss and so forth as opposed to a sexual.
And would the expectation be for an observing Catholic that if they had undertaken an obligation of chastity, that was a matter that would have to be taken to confession if they breached it?
Yes, in serious matters. Yeah.
And could it be resolved by the confessional?
I think that's a very narrow understanding of what the confessional is about.
That's a question.
Pardon?
That's a question.
Well, no, I would say no. I would say if someone thought that was a simpler way of behaving like this and then going to confession and having it absolved and going off happily, is to misunderstand what the sacrament's about.
And that's not the way you'd approach the issue.
No.
Tell me this, do you have a confessor yourself?
Yes.
And do you regularly go to your confessor and confess?
Not regularly, no.
Are you the confessor for others?
In past times, I would have been. It would have been much more regular, but it's something quite different now.
What's changed?
My understanding of the sacrament, my understanding of what sin is, my understanding of what my obligations are in life, and my understanding of what the idea of confession really is about.
How have those things changed?
Well, I think in the past I did see confession and forgiveness as that kind of routine, confessing to small matters that are really of little import, whereas now I sort of see my confessional time as much more in terms of talking about what's going on in my life and what's going on in my emotions and my spiritual life, what I see as impeding me and what I see as assisting me. And that sort of discussion with the confessor.
Are you the confessor to others?
Not a regular one.
Meaning you don't make yourself available regularly?
I'm available if they choose me, but they don't.
They don't come?
The only time that I'm confessor to others is occasionally someone will ring, but it's very occasionally will ring and say, could I just come and see you for a while?
And do you ever have confessions from others of sexual transgressions?
I've heard some confessions of sexual transgressions in terms of adultery, but I'd have to say I've never had anyone confess to sins of abuse of minors. Never.
If a parishioner doesn't confess to the parish priest, who would they generally confess to?
But I'd have to say that the practice of confession is much more limited now than it was in the past. But I know of people from St. Alypius who would come into the cathedral because some people prefer the anonymity of going into a confession, into a confessional box. For me, most of the times the confessions I would hear is people would come and they would sit down and we would talk face to face. But there are still a number of people who prefer the anonymity of the confessional box and they would come into the cathedral.
Your Honour asked you whether, when confessing, the transgression is resolved, and you indicated you thought that was a narrow interpretation of the confessional. Does one generally, following confession, receive absolution?
Generally, yes.
What does absolution mean?
But it means that the forgiveness that is offered by God for those who repent and have the desire to change in their repentance, that forgiveness is given to them mediated through the medium of the priest and the church.
And by giving forgiveness, they are absolved of any transgression that they have confessed.
Well, part of their confession has to be a resolution and a commitment, to change and not to continue with what it was they came to confess. I mean, if they intend to continue that, there's no point in the confessional.
It would be quite common, wouldn't it, Father, for people to confess over and over again a similar transgression?
Yes.
Which
And
suggests...
a lot of that has to do with scruples. With the scrupulous, sort of people who suffer from scruples.
So if you suffer from scruples, you tend to learn from the confession and not do it again? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying that some people have a spiritual or psychological condition in which they over-worry about things they've done as to whether they're wrong.
You say that you haven't heard a confession of a crime, is that right?
That's right, yeah.
If you did hear a confession of a crime, would you feel obliged to keep that to yourself?
Obviously, this is a burning question, and one that I've had to give a great deal of thought to. And my current thought is that I think if it's a crime is a crime and has to be reported. So and I know that's not, excuse me, Bishop, but I know that that's not the teaching of the Church, but that's the conclusion I've come to is that if someone confesses to a crime, then I can't forgive that unless they're able to go and report the crime.
That hasn't happened, you're saying?
No, it hasn't.
If it did happen, who would you report the crime to?
If it's a crime, I'd go to the police.
You would report to the police?
Yes.
Would you tell the...
And I know that that's not the current teaching of the Church, but that's what I would feel obliged to do.
Would you tell the person confessing that you were proposing to do that?
Yes.
Would you seek their consent?
Yes, but if they didn't give it, I would still feel that I needed to act in that way.
Is this something you've discussed with other priests?
Not on and off, but not in a serious way. It comes up from time to time, as you know, in the public forum about the secrecy or the sanctity of it, if you like, of the confessional, and when it does, it usually invites discussion.
When you've discussed it with other priests, have they said to you that they have received a confession of a crime?
No.
In your discussions, have they approached the issue in the same way as you? That is, they would report to the police?
I haven't had anyone say that.
Have you had anyone say the opposite?
Yes.
That they would keep what was said in the confession
Yes.
private?
Yes.
Did you seek to persuade them to your point of view?
Oh, well, I would just talk about tell them how I see things.
When did you come to that view, given it is, as you say, against the teachings of the Church?
Probably over the last 3 or 4 years.
What prompted it?
Prompted because it's become a question in the public forum, really.
So you have heard people speak about the confessional being used to cover up crimes?
Not to cover up crimes, no.
How would you describe it?
I would sort of see it just as someone coming in to confess that they've done something wrong.
We're not just talking about doing something wrong, Father, we're talking about a crime.
Well, they've done something wrong which amounts to being a crime.
If you don't, that is, as parish priest hearing the confession, report it to the police, are you concealing that crime, do you think?
That's the conclusion I'm coming to.
Has it been discussed in any formal way within the Church, to your knowledge?
Not in my presence. I mean, I would say that the whole question of the sanctity or the secrecy of confession is probably discussed at the highest levels.
You don't feel bound by the church and its teachings in not going to the police were it the case that a crime was confessed to you?
Well, as I said, this is the position I've come to. I devoutly hope that it never comes to reality, that I have to face it.
Would you feel obliged to talk to the bishop before you went to the police?
I wouldn't feel obliged to, but I might well do so.
Bishop, there will be evidence later in this hearing about the experience of other priests. But have you heard of priests who have abused children going to a confessor and being absolved?
No, I've never heard of that. Not in my personal experience, no.
Friendship or association with him after
No, we were
Rome?
never close.
No?
No.
Were you ever at the same parish?
No. We were ordained 2 days apart, but no, we were never in the same parish, and we were never close friends or anything like that. We were just associates.
Between you knowing him in 1962 at the seminary and understanding he was convicted in 1998, did you hear any complaints or rumours about his conduct in respect of abusing children?
I'm sorry, would you...
Between knowing him in 1962 at the seminary and understanding in 1998 that he had been convicted, between that period of time, did you hear any complaints or rumours against him of child sexual misconduct?
I would need to know where he was when he was charged, whether he was at Wendouree or at Portland.
How will that matter?
Because I heard of his charges when he was at Portland, which was subsequent to Wendouree.
What happened at Wendouree?
To my recollection, and that's all it is, he was simply moved as a matter of course.
So do you now think that he was moved from Wendouree to Portland because there were complaints against him at Wendouree?
I don't know that for certain, but I suspect that might be the case.
Now that was maybe the mid to late 90s. Were you... Well, he was convicted in 1998, assuming there was some period of time between being charged and convicted, without being more precise than that. Were you on the consultors committee then?
I honestly don't recall that.
So you don't recall his misconduct coming up at the Consultants Committee when you were present?
No, I don't recall it.
If the need to move him because of difficulties in Wendouree, if there was that need because of those difficulties, would you have expected those difficulties to have been discussed at a consultants meeting, although you may not have been present?
Yes, I would expect so.
We spoke before about there being a full and frank discussion at consultants meetings. Would it be your expectation that whenever it was thought necessary to move a priest because of allegations, that the consultants would have been told the whole story?
I would expect that it would have been told the reason for shifting him, yes.
Yeah.
Brian Finnegan was at the seminary with you?
Yes, coming after me, yeah.
He was at the seminary while you were there, although he didn't start at the same year as you.
Yes.
And you've had dealings with him thereafter in the parish or the diocese?
In the diocese, yes.
He's been on a number of consultants committees with you?
Now, I can't remember whether he was on consultants committees with me, but I can remember that he was the bishop's secretary, wasn't he?
The bishop's secretary after you?
Yes. Yes, sometime after me.
He's currently doing what job?
Auxiliary bishop in Brisbane.
When he was in the diocese and when you were in the diocese, did you have any discussions with him about other priests and complaints against them of child sexual misconduct?
I don't recall any.
No? Is he the sort of person who you would have confided in?
If I thought that something needed to be reported, I'd be happy to report it to Brian.
Is he the sort of person that you think, given your relationship, he would have confided in you?
I don't think our relationship is that close.
At the time, Your Honour.
Yes, we'll take the short adjournment.
All said.